Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 316 of our Tick Bootcamp podcast. The title of today's interview is Reclaiming Embodiment. It's an interview with Dana Papadopoulos. My name is Katie DePaula Silverman. I am the co-host for this episode, and I'm the founder of IGC Coaching School and the author of At Least You Look Good. And I'm joined by
Richard Johannesson.
Yes. So we had some really big insights and takeaways from this episode. We talked about rebuilding trust with yourself, getting back in your body, which is, you can see from our title of our episode. We talked about listening to really what's going on inside of ourselves, being our own advocates, which us Lyme warriors know is so important, holding our doctors accountable through the process. And really, what I loved so much was the end when we got to talking about creating this vision of what you really want in your healing process. So I thought it was super transformational. I loved chatting with Dana, and I think you're going to love her story. Dana,
Hello.
we're so excited to have you here. I'm so excited to be co-hosting with Rich. We really miss Matt, but he's out there supporting us. Dana, we want to get started with your story. We want to hear the background. Where'd you grow up? What was your childhood like? Where do you live now?
Yeah.
This is like first date status. So
All right, you're getting the whole background.
yeah.
So I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio. I live now in Charlotte, North Carolina. I moved here about, remembering what year we're in. I moved here about 6 years ago. So I grew up the majority of my life in Middleburg Heights, like a little suburb in Ohio. So that's where I'm from. And I am an only child, throw that out there. So I just grew up with me and my parents. And growing up, I feel like I had a pretty, not cookie cutter, growing up, it was pretty basic. I wasn't super sick. I was actually thinking about it today, and I was actually super into sports, in high school. Sometimes I think back to it. I'm just like, what did I feel like before Lyme? And I just remember being in high school. I played volleyball. I was super into sports, all throughout high school. I remember at one point doing 3-a-days, and I mean, I don't think I had the best sleep, but somehow I just remember feeling like Wonder Woman, or that I was invincible. And so I've always thought, I'm like, well, was I sick growing up? And not really. I never really went to the doctor or anything like that. So growing up, I didn't really have any suspicion of being sick or anything.
Yeah.
So, and then let you tell me how much further I need to go. But it wasn't until I started getting sick at around 18. It was my freshman year of college when I started getting symptoms that weren't normal and were affecting me every day. It wasn't just a normal cold or, the flu. Yeah, that's probably around the time when I started having symptoms. And I will say, you didn't ask this, but I think it could be relevant, relatable to someone listening, is I did struggle with an eating disorder in high school. At one point I was 16. I was anorexic. So I did get sick in that sense, but I was blessed to recover extraordinarily quickly. I did therapy for a year, my senior year of high school. And I was seeing a physician, nutritionist, and seeing a therapist. So, and then I was good. I was fine for 2 years. And then that's where other symptoms came up that, again, were not eating disorder related, were not flu or cold symptom related. And it was persistent. And so that was kind of me in a nutshell growing up.
Yeah. Well, we definitely want to get to your symptoms and that part of the story. But before we go there, I'd love to know, because for those of us who have had Lyme and who have had long journeys with Lyme, and for the people that are listening, there is this before story and this before version of us, right? And I always think it's so interesting to look back at what were our childhood dreams and what did we want before we got sick, right? And before this was like this sort of other player in our life. So do you remember when you think back to your childhood and growing up and high school years, what were some of your dreams and goals?
Yeah. It's hard in the sense that I did get sick so young, you know, like I feel like right at the stage when you're like ready to like start dreaming and figuring out what you want to do, I feel like I really didn't get to dream that much because it was just like I got sick. I started getting really sick my first year of college, and honestly, I wasn't really prepared for college. I didn't have the conversations of like, what did you want to do career-wise? So I remember going to college. The first college I went to, I was undecided, you know, I was trying to figure it out. And the second college I went to, I actually did have some type of plan. So I did start going to fashion school. So I went to Kent State University. I went to the fashion school at Kent State. So it was that was my second year of college. I transferred there from Miami University of Ohio, and I went there for the fashion school. And so, but then after that first year is when I got really sick. And I remember that second semester, that spring semester is when I had to like drop out because it had gotten so bad. But I did have a vision. It was very small, you know, it was brief, but I did have this vision of going to fashion school, going to New York and doing the whole fashion thing, which I ended up actually still graduating with a fashion degree. It took me 6 years to finish because I kept getting sick and having to drop out. But that was the little vision to start.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Go ahead, Rich.
So then why don't you talk a little bit about what brought you to fashion school, right? Because what Katie's asking you to do is sort of like build out what your inspiration. How did you determine, you know, that you wanted to become a fashionista or a fashion designer or, you know, someone with a passion for fashion? And how did you think you were going to be serving the world by studying fashion?
Yeah. So that's where it's funny because I wasn't really into like fashion growing up, but I did go to modeling school when I was younger. I can't remember exactly what age. I think it was like between like 10 and 12. I think I was in fashion school or modeling school. And I just remember having this really like creative side to me. So I remember when I was trying to figure out what to go to college for, there was always just like this creative part in me. Like even in like high school, I really was drawn to like art classes and things like that. So I wanted to do something that was like creative and kind of like fostered that in me. And then, so I think that's what led me to fashion school. Like I was really creative. I loved clothes. I loved styling. And I think also I really wanted to like pair my faith into that and go into, so like eventually I even started like a fashion blog. And I tied my faith into that too. So I think to answer your question, it was just a really fun, creative outlet for me that like I was just hoping to take. And I dreamt of like being like stylist for people on like red carpets. And I was like, oh, that would be so fun to be like this fashion stylist for these celebrities and stuff. So yeah, it was just something that I just like kind of like felt in me that I had like this creative part of me that I could.
So build out the faith piece with us, right? You said that you believe that your faith and your creative passions and your aptitude were crossing over. So talk to us about how they were crossing over, and talk to us about why you believe this element of creativity was put into you so that you could serve.
Yeah, I think we're all creative in a sense. Like we're all creators of whatever, and we all have a creative side to us. But for me, I am a Christian, and I became a Christian at 16, a very young age. I always say it's a total God moment in like how he found me and when he found me. Because truly, I believe if I had become a Christian at 16 with my faith, I probably would have died from the eating disorder, to be honest. And it was really only my relationship with him that was like one of the things that like got me through, like, you know, the eating disorder, just constantly telling yourself, you know, reminding yourself like who you were created to be. And so I had like that faith component built into me from like a really young age. And I knew like going through something really hard at such a young age and having like my faith being literally the main thing to like get me through, I knew that like no matter what profession I did, or even like in the fashion realm, that was something that I was always going to like take with me. Cause like we live in a really hard world. Like we're all going through things that are extremely difficult, no matter what field you're in or what you're doing. And I just knew like I had this piece, this component that I knew could help other people who were also going through extremely difficult things. So fashion was like, oh, I could do this as my creative outlet, but like I can also still share, you know, my passion, or share that like faith component in that, especially in the fashion world, because I mean, there's so much, I mean, eating disorders are prevalent in that world, especially modeling, which I did. And like, I could just see like there was a lot of like sadness and darkness there. And I just wanted to be able to bring light into that space as well.
So Dana, we've had a lot of people on this podcast talk about eating disorders and anorexia as part of their journey. It's been a pretty common theme that we've seen. And we've actually had doctors like Dr. Horowitz share with us, and as part of his MSID's diagnostic tool, that extreme weight loss is actually an indicator of Lyme disease. And many people who are suffering from these types of disorders, which are actually physiologically, not emotionally based. But we've also had other folks. We had this wonderful model from the UK talk about how she was encouraged to lose weight. She was ultimately, strongly encouraged to lose weight, and it became something that, allowed her to have a lot of success in the modeling community. But unfortunately, it was immunosuppressive. So, in your situation, do you think that your eating disorder was, in fact, an eating disorder that was driven by a desire to have a particular body type, and that made you more vulnerable to the disease? Or do you think that you had been bitten by a tick earlier, or perhaps were even managing cognitive Lyme disease, and that presented itself as an eating disorder during your 16-year, during the early 16 years on Earth?
Yeah, I've thought about that. I thought about, because I don't have the moment of like, oh, I got bit by a tick, I can see it, I know, like I do not have that. That's not my story. And sometimes, I mean, I'm even had a lot of hypotheses. I think also like it could have been passed down. Like, I listened to Kelly Flanagan's podcast the other day, and she brought it up, like, you can pass it through from mother to child now. So I think that's also a possibility for me. And then I just got into situations that were extraordinarily stressful, and it, like brought it out. In regards to the eating disorder, I know that I had it just because of the environment I grew up in. It was really hard, really harsh, and that turned into self-hatred. So like it was the eating disorder for me was like, it was something, and I mean, you're 16, you don't consciously think of these things, but you're in an environment you can't control, and you're also being controlled in that environment. So like as a kid, what can you control? What goes in your mouth? So, I was just so restrictive with my food because it was just a form of, again, it's like something I could control, like when in an environment that I couldn't control. But the thing is, like with addiction of any form, the crazy thing is, like in the beginning you control it, but by the end of it, it controls you. Yeah. So that's what ended up happening to me. Like in the beginning, it's like, oh yeah, like I control this, but by the end, it's like you have no control, So it's a catch-22.
Totally. And
go ahead.
I think, it's interesting to hear Rich say like that this is so many people's stories, that an eating disorder is often another part of the story of Lyme disease. And we'll keep talking about how those things connect. But to me, it's like, when we have this relationship with our body where we're battling it in some way, and then something else comes in and invades our bodies, like we lose all control. And the irony is, we're trying to control things to begin with. So we'll get to, recommendations and advice for other people, but, looking at our environments, and as maybe we grow up and have kids and are aware of, creating environments in our bodies and both in our external worlds where dis-ease can't come in so easily and take over. So let's talk a little bit, Dana, about your symptoms. And you say that you don't know the exact moment when you were bit. You don't have a memory of that. You don't know if it happened, if it got passed down. A lot of people are in your position where they're just not sure, right?
Yeah.
So talk to us about when symptoms started. How did they develop? Like, when did this start to invade your space and your life?
Yeah. So it was I say my freshman year of college. It was my second year at like a second school. I started off at Miami University and then transferred to Kent State. And it was that first year at Kent State, I started having really bad digestive issues. And there were kind of like two catalyst things that happened around that time, or actually like three. One, I think the stress of like moving to another school, it was a really stressful time, hard decision. I went out of the country and I went to China for a few weeks. I think it was like 6 weeks. I went to China that summer. And I just remember coming back from China, like my digestive system was like never the same. And I remember seeing doctor after doctor and they were like, oh, you said like IBS. But I was like, I know this is not IBS. Like I just knew in my gut. No.
In your gut.
Yeah. I was like, this is not IBS. And I kept going to doctor to doctor to doctor. No one would believe me. I mean, you're 18, no physician takes you seriously. So then I get my wisdom teeth out that fall or that winter break. And I always say like, I was never the same after I got my wisdom teeth out. And I don't know if it's like the stress or it could be a lot of things now that I'm learning, but that from that point on, it was like, I couldn't eat a thing. I dropped like 30 pounds within a few months. And then people were like, oh, you have an eating disorder. I'm like, no, like, I was like, even if I eat like just one grape or something so small, it feels like I had like a steak or like 5 steaks. Like it was just so painful when I would eat. And I just kept pressing doctors. Like, I'm like, something is wrong. I can't eat. Like I'm in so much pain. And so finally, and I was blessed to live in Middleburg Heights, which is really close to the Cleveland Clinic. So like I was going to the Cleveland Clinic, they're have some of the top doctors in the world. And I was like, you do run every test. I was just pushing so hard. And so finally, my first diagnosis after finally like just begging all these doctors to just test me for everything was gastroparesis. And that was kind of the first diagnosis I ever got. And I was like, oh, this is it. Like I'll just cure this and then like, we'll be fine. And then I tried the medications, they didn't work. And then it was just like, I just kept getting worse and worse. And then like the diagnosis kept piling on. Like, I think it was a year after that, I ended up in a wheelchair and I was like, I was so dizzy and I got diagnosed with like POTS. And then a year after that, it was something else like Hashimoto's. And a year after that, it was like Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. It's just like they kept piling on because I just wasn't getting better. So that was kind of like, that's kind of what started it all. And then that was around 18, 19. I'm 31 now. It's been like a 12-year journey of like the diagnoses just piling on.
So how are you feeling during all of this? Like, I just see these like energetic bricks like stacking on.
Oh my gosh. You feel so alone. You feel crazy. I mean, again, because I was so young and I was just like, I just felt like it was like me against the world in the sense like trying to get people to believe me, trying to get family to believe me. I mean, no one would believe me. Physicians wouldn't believe me. So this was like like 2011, 2012, like there's so many more resources now, but at that time there was nothing. Like the only resource I had at that point was then to like go to social media. So then it was through like social media and the internet and all these like blogs when blogging first started coming about that I was able to learn about like gastroparesis and like POTS. And I started finding like other pockets of women that were like dealing with all this stuff. And I'm just like, okay, like I'm not crazy. It's not in my head. Like there are other people that are really young and sick with these same diagnoses that are all struggling. It's just, you feel so alone because like usually I didn't feel alone on social media because that's the only place that I was able to find other people dealing with the same things I was. But out in the quote unquote real world, like in Western medicine and around friends and family, and like you're just so alone, and you just feel like you're just journeying on this, just trying to, you know, stay true to yourself and almost like bolster yourself up to be like, okay, you're not crazy. And then just trying to, you know, find the resources you can, people you can to try and treat whatever you've been diagnosed with.
Yeah, I think like believing ourselves is such an important part of this. Like,
Yeah.
so many people question.
Yeah.
You have to come back to this self-belief. Go
Yeah.
ahead, Rich.
So let's talk about a couple of things, Dana, that we customarily see on the podcast. And one of the things that I always like to do is define risk. Like the risk of Lyme disease is generally a formula. At least General Stanley McChrystal in his book Risk argued that risk is actually a formula. It's threat times vulnerability, right? What is our vulnerability and what is the risk? And as each side increases, the likelihood of us getting sick is going to increase, right? So on the vulnerability piece of this, we've seen repeatedly that people who have traveled during some time during their life, that the travel is immunosuppressive. And you took a long trip to China. What impact do you think that travel had on your immune system? And do you believe that was part of what caused your symptoms to take off?
Yeah. So I had traveled prior to that, in the sense that I had visited like Greece at least like 4 times since that. I have family over there. I'm Greek. My last name kind of gives that away.
Yeah, Papadopoulos is a Greek name?
Yeah, very. So I had traveled internationally before, and I had even been to the Dominican Republic in high school on a mission trip. I think we were only there for a week. So, but I just don't think my body was like acclimated to like, you know, like Asian food, Asian culture, like that whole, it's a whole other world. If you've ever, you know, if you've ever visited, like, cause I'd visited to Europe, but like Asia is just a whole other ball game. And so I'm not quite sure how much traveling per se played into it, because I traveled before to like Europe and Dominican Republic, but that maybe because like you said, I was there for so long, I could have been bit over there. I'm not sure. I do remember growing up, like just getting bit in the sense of like, I was getting mosquito bites all the time. And my dad would joke, he was like, oh, you just have the same blood type as me, which I think was like A. He was like, they just love us. So like, even if I had gotten bit, like, it was just like, oh, this is normal. But so I'm not sure how much travel essentially played in it, but maybe traveling specifically to Asia. It was.
So there's another piece that I'm going to talk to you about on the vulnerability front, because we've had a lot of people, for example, my co-host became chronically ill shortly after undergoing a dental procedure. And I understand that shortly before you became sick, you had your wisdom teeth removed. So talk to us about that experience and whether you think that played a role in making you vulnerable as a result of immunosuppression and more likely to have this disease take off in your body.
Yeah, it's so crazy looking back on that time, because I remember I was like trying to put the pieces together, and I'm just like, okay, I know that this plummeted me, like getting my wisdom teeth out. And I remember going back to the doctor. I mean, I remember at that point Googling like, well, what happened? What could happen? And I remember I just like look back and I'm like, how was I so at 18? I'm just like, man, girl, like you were smart. Like I should give myself more credit. But like I remember Googling that like about like the vagus nerve, and maybe like that could have been like, you know, like gosh, what's the word, just like ruptured, or you know, just like damaged in the process. So I remember going back to the dentist and I was just like, I don't know what happened, but I cannot eat, like something happened after this. And I remember him being like, no. And I was like, well, did you like nick my vagal nerve, because like that can cause like digestive issues or whatever. And again, like it was just like a repeated pattern of like, I would go to these physicians, they would be like, no, I did nothing wrong, or like, no, you're fine, no, you're making it up, you're just crazy. And that's basically what he told me. So I just like put it to bed since that. But as I've been on my healing journey, that is something I'm actually even currently looking into, is and this is kind of like, I know like a taboo kind of subject in like our community about like cavitations. Like I've been told that I have, you know, like cavitations, and I've literally gone to 3 different dentists and they've kind of confirmed that. So I was like, okay. So I'm currently on the process of like thinking like, you know, maybe that could be another piece of my healing puzzle. It's like if I really, because I was really sick since that, and I'm like, if I could maybe get these taken out, that'll just be another part of my healing. Like just as you know, you learn in your healing journey, it's just like you find these roadblocks or these blockages. It's like and we just try to like, you know, peel back the layers and get rid of those. So I'm like wondering if that could be. I'm currently on that journey of like undoing that puzzle piece and seeing if that could be something that could help me heal even more.
Let me ask both of you another piece of this. You know, one of the observations we've made on this podcast is the female journey is different than the male journey. It just simply is. And one of the things that we've been exploring in a little bit more detail recently is the toxicity of, you know, sort of modern life, right? I mean, we are swimming in a toxic pool, and we'll talk about some of the physical toxins that we have to deal with. I know that was a part of your journey, but why don't you talk to me a little bit about social toxins, right? And what it's like to live as, you know, as a young woman in our society, and the toxins that are likely to be immunosuppressive as a young woman living in American society.
So when you say socially, you just mean culturally? Is that
however you want to define that? Because I do think as the father of 4 daughters, I certainly look at the world a lot differently now that I have 4 daughters. I saw the world very differently before I was a dad of young women, and I think the pressures on women are very, very different. And I think social media has exacerbated that beyond imagination. And I don't know if either of you watched the Netflix documentary, The Social Dilemma, but that really gave me really powerful data to support the observations I was making as the father of young women. So I'm just wondering, and I'd like you to weigh in on this as well, Katie, whether you think there are social pressures that women have to deal with generally that are different than men, and do you think there is an element of toxicity that makes you more vulnerable and more maybe immunocompromised than maybe men in our society?
It's like totally a rhetorical question. I mean, yeah, 100%. I think that the challenges that come with being a woman are incredibly different. And I mean, you're talking about like social pressures and the pressure to be thin and the pressure to be beautiful. And, you know, we can get into like Botox and filler and like all these other things that women put into their bodies that men, not no men, but most men do not do, right? And then there's birth control that you're put on at a young age because of whatever, like usually not because of birth control reasons, like, you know, because of acne, because of hormones, because of PMS. I mean, they just pour things into our bodies as women, I think. So, you know, and then this was the first place I thought you were going, but like makeup and hair products and, you know, slathering your body with these perfumes and this and that. And so, I mean, I'm a little bit older than you, Dana, but not that much older. So, you know, we more grew up in like the world of magazines and comparing yourselves to celebrities. Now it's different. I want to say it's worse, but I don't really know. I do think that with the internet, we have more examples. So like, yeah, you know, it's not just these 5 women that everyone, you know, everyone in the world somehow looks up to. I do think it's diversified so much in every way in terms of, you know, race, age, body type, like everything. And I think that I don't have kids yet, but like my friends who have kids, like they say that their kids are really about being different and about standing out and about being an individual. I do think that's different than our generation and how we grew up. I think you were really supposed to fit in and really supposed to look a certain way. And I do think the pressures of that are probably immunosuppressant. Like why would it not be? You know, I don't know how we study that, but I definitely think that that's a huge piece.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. I feel like there's just so much, there's always been like so much pressure in every area, you know, like professionally, there's lots of pressures for women to be these like powerhouse women to achieve, you know, but then there's also pressure to be the best mom. And like, it's just in every facet of our life, I feel like there's just pressure to just accomplish, be perfect, do the best, be the best, and look really good while you're doing it. And then also to your point, yeah, about so many things we put on our body that are just like toxic, like the chemicals. Like I've since purged all of my products. I do clean beauty, non-toxic, just trying to eliminate like that toxic overload.
Yeah.
From like products, medications, like I don't like anything. Like I just try to eliminate as much toxicity like as I can. But yeah, to your point, yeah, socially and culturally, there's just also just so much, like you said, immunosuppression is pressure suppressing us, because the pressure is just a lot of times it's just so overwhelming because it's unachievable. Clear, it's 100% unachievable. And again, to your point, like that's just how we grew up. I don't have kids yet either, and hopefully that pressure is. But I will say I have seen, like with the social dilemma, like even just kids now, like there is still that pressure, you know.
For sure.
It looks a little different, but there's this pressure to perform or have this many followers or have this. There's always that pressure, and I hope I can be a mom one day where like I just alleviate that pressure and be like, you'll never achieve it. It's not realistic. It's not real.
So let's zero in on social pressures and social toxins a minute. Yolanda Hadid, who is, you know, one of the OGs in this community and certainly one of the great leaders in this community. By the way, Yolanda, we need you on the podcast.
Yes.
Tangentially. She has recently come back into the community. She talked about having to socially detox, talked about having to take a break from social media. And most recently, she has shared that she believes that her time on the Housewives series was something that was socially toxic and had made her very sick. So why don't you talk to us a little bit about social toxins as women, and not just in your relationship with men and culture generally, but how about in your relationships with one another?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that, like, you know, when we're concerned about everyone around us, whether people like us, whether people accept us, how we look, are we thin enough? Do we fit in? Then we leave our bodies, right? Like we're literally disassociating. And so we don't know what's going on in our bodies. I think it's interesting that when you talk to so many people, and I would say this is not just women, but we're focusing on that for this part of the conversation. So many of us are like, I don't know when I got sick. I don't really know when the symptoms started. Here's what I think. I've been trying to put the pieces together. How are you 30 years old, 35? I'm 35. How are you decades into your life and like not sure what exactly happened? You know what I mean? Like it's kind of weird and like freaky that like we're so aware of, and I think Yolanda is such a great example, so aware of everything else that's going around us socially, that we lose sight of and we literally disassociate with what's going on inside of us. And so, you know, that's why I think in part, sometimes it takes so long to not fix ourselves, but deal with what gets the core issue. You know, I talk a lot about this in my book, which is called At Least You Look Good. But I talk about how I'm like very self-admittedly saying, I was so focused on how I looked, you know, and then everyone else around me was like, well, you look good. You don't look sick. And it took me a long time to figure out, I maybe can control what's going on the outside, but I certainly can't control what's going on the inside. And I need to get a grip on what's going on in the inside. So my perspective would be that socially and being so aware of and connected to everything outside of us rather than what's going on inside is a huge factor in so many women being affected by this.
Yeah.
So Dana, talk to us about you know, the social pressures you've had to deal with and what impact you think that played in your journey. And I just want to tease the folks, because I do want to talk about appearance in a minute as well, but we'll get there.
Yeah. So socially, I feel like, so when I went on social media, I really I mean, social media has been a blessing to me in the sense that it was really my saving grace, and to find like resources on like how to heal and like what to do. Cause like I went to doctors and they weren't helpful. And this was something that I'll revert back to your other question of like being a woman and being sick, and with that in like this society, not only is there like pressure, but there's also stereotypes, in the sense I feel like being a woman and being a woman who deals with like chronic illness is like, you're so stereotyped in the sense of like, oh, well, like, oh, you're just being emotional, or, it's like, I just remember being told by so many doctors, they're like, oh, you just have anxiety or depression. I'm just like, no. I'd be like, I'm depressed because of this, but I'm like, that's not like the root of this. So that was something that I wanted to bring up, that like, I just struggled with like being a woman. Like, I just feel like I was stereotyped of like, this is all in your head, you're crazy. It's really just your emotions. It's this like, you're just anxiety, you have like depression. And I'm just like, which I think you get more as like, I feel like you maybe get more as a woman, but I could be wrong.
So then are you talking about being gaslit by doctors or by everyone in general? I mean, because you did, when you were talking with Katie a little bit earlier, talk about on your journey, people in your personal life not accepting that you were sick or not believing that you were sick. So is this just from the medical community, or are you saying just in general, the people in your life were gaslighting you and not believing that you were sick despite sharing with them that you are?
Yeah, I guess both, honestly. If I look back at it, it was just really hard to get family and like friends to believe me. I mean, it's still debated today. Is Lyme real? And I'm just like, I'm shook. We're still debating that. But it's just like back then, a decade ago, like just trying to get friends and family to believe you was just like really, really, really difficult. And yeah, that was also, so yeah, being gaslit by the medical community or like doctors, but then also, yeah, like friends and family, it was just like, it was really hard getting people to believe you that like it was real, or that you weren't like making it up.
That's so hard. Like, to me, that's just like one of the hardest parts is like, and you said this earlier in the interview, and I'm so glad we're just circling back to it, but like that, like our families don't believe us, like parents, like it's just so wild to me. And I do think that that's one of the reasons why diagnosis can take so long, because if the people closest to you that are supposed to be your allies, and I'm not blaming or shaming, like I get it. If you're not experiencing something, you went through this, Rich, I'm sure once you actually got bit, you were like, holy crap, this is crazy. This is so, I heard it from that, but to experience it firsthand is different.
Absolutely. It is certainly a very different experience living that gaslighting experience when your doctors are not properly trained, and they're certainly not sensitive, which is why I had to go on my personal journey of making sure that I wouldn't get sick, because my doctors were simply incompetent. I actually couldn't even get an appointment with my doctor's office. On the day that I was bitten, I called Matt. He said to me, call the doctor right away. I called the doctor right away, and the gatekeeper said, there's nothing wrong with you. Don't come to us unless you have symptoms. And she and I got into a huge battle, and I was able to get in later that week, but only to see the PA. She said the doctor wouldn't be willing to see me at all because I didn't have any symptoms. So it is a part of, that experience. But of course, then we have the larger picture, which is of course, not being believed at all, which brings me to another thing that, I really want to talk to you about. And Katie, you just actually brought up something that no one else ever has brought up before, which is this disassociation in advance of being sick. And so let's focus on that, because one of the things that we've been developing here at Sick Boot Camp is this concept of having an onboard diagnostic system. Very much like a car, we have a set of tools that we've been born with that give us signals about whether or not we're engaging in behaviors that are going to be supportive or injurious to our well-being, right? And we hear a lot of people say, your body best. And, and I'm like, well, wait a minute, let's pause on that, because I think we have so many things going on in our lives that are causing us not to be in touch with our onboard diagnostic system. And I think it's much worse for women. And I never heard anybody say anything like this, Katie. So I'd really like you to develop this for us, that as a result of the beauty products you were using and this image that you were trying to capture and all these social pressures that you were dealing with, you actually had an out-of-body experience, and you certainly didn't feel anything from your onboard diagnostic system if you're not in your body. And having nothing to do with Lyme, but having to do with the cultural pressures that you were dealing with, which is like mind-blowing and brilliant. So please build that out for us a little bit more, because we've never discussed anything like that in this podcast.
Well, I think I really do need Dana's support to talk about a lot of this and like the eating disorder piece, but I can share a little bit more, which is that, you know, I think that from a very young age as women, and I hope that this is changing, but like we are told that we don't matter, right? Like we're told that what happens with our bodies doesn't matter. Like you're barely educated on your cycle and what's happening in your body. Like I'm going through the process now of trying to get pregnant and like starting that journey. And I'm like, how did I not know all of this, you know? And like, how are you not taught about your own body? So if you're not taught about your body, or there's this implication that things are bad or wrong, or then you're going to think that, you know, they should be hidden, they shouldn't be talked about, they shouldn't be celebrated, right? And so I think it starts at a really young age. And then, like I said, like so many, it's funny, I was talking to someone the other day, and she was a bit older, probably in her mid 50s. And she's like, I just don't understand why all these young women are in your age, in their late 20s and their 30s, are having trouble getting pregnant. And I'm like, because everyone was like put on birth control at such a young age. You're being fed hormones, not often, not even for the birth control, right? And so that completely changes your composition. I mean, it's literally changing how your body functions, like completely, right? So from a really young age, maybe 12, maybe 14, maybe 16, the light's really shining through right now, but from a really young age, like we're just being told by doctors, like, here, take this pill, right? Like this will fix it. And we're looking for these fixes, and we're trying to leave our bodies and not be in our bodies. And so I just think that like disassociation piece is so huge. And my experience with eating disorder was like very short, you know, in college. Like I wouldn't even really feel comfortable like claiming that as part of my experience. But I do think, Dana, that's something important to talk about and touch on, because, you know, to like eating is like literally how we survive as humans. And for so many women to develop eating disorders at such young ages is like mind blowing, but it's real.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I'm so glad we're talking about this, because I have 2 points I wanted to say to piggyback off what you're saying. I'm so glad we're talking about disassociation. That has been just something that I've learned over the past like year. I've been going through a lot of trauma therapy too, which I'm just realizing is just another layer of like part of my healing journey that's like really helping me, is like going through trauma therapy and just realizing. So like when I think of disassociation for me, and I feel like a lot of people in the chronic illness community are going to be able to relate to this, is just like you get to a point of your journey when like nothing works, and like you're just told like this is going to be your forever. You almost like throw up the white flag, and you're like, fine, if this is going to be my forever, I'm just going to accept it. And you're almost like forced to disassociate and say like, okay, this is just going to be me. So like I have to, it's almost just like you get to this pattern where it's just like, well, your body's going off, all these alarms are going off. It's like, well, I don't know what's wrong with you, I don't know how to help you, I try, it doesn't work. So you're just a constant state of like being sick. But it's just like, okay, if this is going to be your forever, you have to you learn to turn off being able to hear and like listen to your body. So you're just like, well, I've tried and it's not working. So it's like, and I would always tell friends, I was like, if I listen to my body, like it says, like, you know, your body knows best, or listen to your gut. It's like, if I listen to my body truly, I would be in bed all day. Like I wouldn't leave my bed. But I was like, nothing has worked. Like, you know, you get to like, when you've tried a lot of things and nothing's worked, like, are you in a really bad flare? You're like, I have 2 choices. I was like, it's like, you can listen to your body and just be bedridden, or you can try to, you know, have some semblance of a life. And like, when you have to do that for so long, is what I did. Like after a decade, it's just like trying to then trying to go through therapy and try to heal again, and like being like, no, I don't want to accept that as my life anymore. And like trying to get back into your body is essentially what I've been doing for the past year and a half, or maybe a year of like trying to like, okay, figure out what my body is actually telling me. Can I help it? What is it saying to me? Is this a physical issue, or is this actually emotional issue? Is this trauma? Is this actually Lyme? Like, and it's just like, I disassociated for so long out of survival, that's what we do.
Yeah.
And now I'm on this journey of like going back into your body. And it's just like, I feel like I'm not even shaming myself in the sense like that's what you do to survive sometimes when you're dealing with this stuff and you can't get answers and you try treatment after treatment. It's like you almost are forced to disassociate to survive. But in order to heal, you have to somehow find the journey back, like you said, like into your body, because like you're not going to ever be able to heal without becoming like one with all of it. And that's something literally like the Lord told me over the past year. He was like, there's no disassociation between like Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. He was like, there cannot be any disassociation with you, like physical, emotional, spiritual, like it's all got to be one. And he's like, you have to get back. I literally have a post-it note on my fridge from something he said. And he was like, get back into your body. And so that's been the journey for me. And I feel like it's a lot, like so many people can relate to that, like of like you end up having to disassociate to survive. But then in order to heal, you kind of have to go back.
Reassociate.
Yeah, you have, and that's been a journey for me, especially like going through like trauma therapy. I've realized is also like when you've gone through trauma, like that, it's a whole other layer.
Yeah. It's like this message of like, you have to come back to, it is safe. Like it is safe to be in my body. It is safe to be me. It's safe to exist. It's safe to share my experience. Like, I remember like when I was going through life coach training, which was 2012, 2013, and 2014 was when I got diagnosed with Lyme. So it was like all happening at the same time. And in the course, like, a lot of it's personal development. You're learning how to coach other people, but you have to like do these exercises with yourself first. And, I remember like doing these exercises where I had to talk about how I felt and what my experience was. And I like literally did not have the words. And, I'm someone who's always been very emotionally intelligent, but like, I truly did not know what feeling, like, I remember like Googling like feelings, like what could I be feeling? Like, I truly did not know what I was feeling. And that was partially, I think, to, what Rich has brought up here because of societal conditioning. And then you put on top, well, like I'm in pain. Why would I want to be in my body?
Right.
I want to disassociate. I want to check out. I want to, right. And so all those things happening at the same time, it's just a recipe for disaster.
Yeah. And to your point, I will say this from a different angle, like not knowing your body, like you were saying, like growing up, we're not taught these things or put on the pill. I'll even say coming from like a Christian background, like you're not taught about your body at all. And you're told it's bad. And like the whole sexual component, you can't talk about, that's reserved for marriage. So it's just like, you put it in this box until that day, or, it's just like, and you are not educated on anything, hormones, your body parts, what they mean, what they do. Like, it's just like a forbidden topic. And so like, that's also been a journey that I've gone through and I continue to go through of like, God created me with this and these things and these parts. What do they mean? How do they function? How do they help me? How do they serve me?
Right.
They're healthy. God gave them to me. Like they serve a purpose and they're not wrong. And to not be educated about that until I'm like 20, 30, 40, like that doesn't really make sense. It's like, we talk about so many other things. And like, I would always say this to people. I'm like, I feel like the church should be talking about, like, you should be talking about everything. Like, cause it's like, if you don't go, then you're going to go to all these other resources. It's just like, I wish my parents would have had the conversation. Like my parents did not have any type of like sex talk or any talk around that, or like, just like the female anatomy, the male anatomy, body parts, just like, and if we don't do that, like as in friends, family, in safe places, and parents, like you go to other people. And it's just like, I feel like that should be definitely, to your point, like we should be educated on those things sooner. at a younger age, and there should be no shame or condemnation around it. Like, it should be something that's just like a normal part of healthy communication, truly.
So let's talk a little bit about appearance and the pressures to have a particular appearance and the impact that that's having on the diagnostic responsibility, I can say that word, of physicians, right? So one of the things that we've heard, and of course Katie has captured it brilliantly in her book, at least you look good, is a phrase we hear from doctors all the time. And I'm just wondering what your perspective is on having, on the one side of the coin, the social pressures to have a particular appearance, and then going to a doctor who is now going to be diagnosing you and looking at you in part about how you look to determine whether you're sick. I mean, how does that sort of like, because remember, the doctor is getting information when he or she or they are diagnosing you, right? And there are a lot of different pieces of that. And if we're under these pressures to wear makeup and to have our hair done well, but we feel like hell, what impact do you think that sort of conflict is having on the information doctors are being given when trying to help us be diagnosed with our illnesses?
Yeah, I think, I've even heard, or physicians have actually told me like, oh, well, I'm so sorry. Like, this is what you have, or, I've literally had physicians be like, we've reached the end, like, there's nothing else I can do to help you. But they're like, well, at least you look good. Or they're like, at least you don't look as bad as you feel. And it's just like, well, do you want me to look as bad as I feel? It's like, I heard someone say, it's just like when you're dealing with chronic illness and Lyme, like, so much is taken from you. It's like, sometimes just making yourself look good or feel good, like, sometimes making yourself look good is like the only thing that'll help you get through the day. Cause it's like, you feel so bad, but it's like, like, if I can put on a little makeup, if I can make myself look a little better, it gets like, sometimes it's like the saving grace that just gets you through that hour, that moment, that day. So then for it to be thrown back in your face, like, oh, well, at least you look good. It's like, do you want me to go around looking like death? Cause that's what I feel like. But it's just like, it's almost like a shaming of like, well, because sometimes it does help you in the moment with your mental health, but so I've literally had physicians tell me that. And I think, to my point earlier, it's like half the battle is getting someone to believe you, but then the other half of the battle is getting someone to believe that it's really that serious. Because even today, like, I'll tell people like, yeah, like, I'm battling Lyme, and because it's so different across the board for so many different people, men, women, some people are like, oh yeah, heard of it. Now now because it has become a little bit more accepted, I do have people that are like, oh yeah, I've heard of that. And then it's just like, no, but you don't understand. I'm like, this wrecks your life, like, in every facet of it, emotionally, physically, relationally, financially, like, so that's like also like half the battle. And like, it can point to your looks in the sense that like, well, they see you look good, so they're like, it can't be that serious. But it's like, you don't know what goes on behind the scenes. Like, I'm in the bathroom for like 3 to 4 hours a day trying to like detox and do enemas. It's like, they don't see the times you're like bedridden because you're like in a flare. So like, that's where like perception can play into it, where I think is another component of this is like, yeah, half the battle is getting someone to believe you. And the other half is like getting them to believe that it really is that detrimental to your health and to your body and to your life and your mental health and everything. Like, it really does affect every asset. And to your point, I guess, is like, when we don't look as bad, it's like, it's harder, I guess, maybe for some people to believe that it really is that serious, and it really can kill you. Like, it really can. Like, if you deny, and like, we aren't trying to do what we can to like heal.
So Katie, we've had a couple of guests on this podcast who have argued that the best way of healing is from the outside in. Specifically, we interviewed Miranda Holder, who had a really, really powerful story, and Miranda's a celebrity from the UK, where she said that it wasn't until she saw herself in the mirror and she saw how bad she looked that she knew what she had to do, and she had to get herself together and start to look better to ultimately feel better and go on her healing journey. And right after that, we interviewed Mallory Green, who's one of the activists in our community, and she told us exactly the same story. So again, we have this sort of like this paradox where if you're going to a doctor and you are now trying to heal from the outside in and you want to look good and feel good, and there's that best-selling book, I think it was Jenna Kutcher wrote, Girl, Wash Your Face, right? Where she had to get herself together in order to be able to go on her healing journey. So you're trying to heal from the outside in, you're trying to look good, you're trying to use that as a vehicle for feeling good, but then you get to the doctor and you hear, well, you don't look sick, or you look good. So give us that piece of it, how it may be even a second cut where you're trying to get yourself together to heal. You want to look good, so it helps you to feel good. But then the doctor is now using that as a vehicle for arguing that there's really nothing wrong with you.
Yeah, well, I think the book you're talking about, Girl Wash Your Face, is by Rachel Hollis.
I'm sorry, Rachel Hollis. That's right.
And it's actually quite controversial for a lot of these reasons that we're talking about. And I do think that what's going on the outside can provide a wake-up call, right? Like I talk about in my book, and I think I talked about this on our podcast the first time, that I started to get paralysis and I started to feel it creep up into my face. And I had read about facial paralysis, and that was what was the final straw that motivated me to call a Lyme literate doctor and to get, to prioritize this, because I had been dealing with it, but also sort of ignoring it. And, I think it's sort of a double-edged sword. I mean, I'm sort of the mindset of whatever motivates you, whatever's the thing for you, just go with it. If it's outside and you don't like what you see when you look in the mirror and that's what motivates you, fine. If it's what's going on the inside, if you don't feel well, but in most cases, it's going to be a mix of the two, right? I think where we get really screwed up is when we think that what's happening on the outside is somehow the only indicator of what's going on. But I look in the mirror, or I look at photos of myself from when I was really sick. I'm I look so different now. I have so much more life in my eyes. I don't have bags under my eyes. My hair is different. I feel different, but I also look different. So I don't know. I think it's a really tough conversation, Rich, to be honest.
It is, which is why we're having it here, which is why this is turning out to be such a cool podcast. So Dana, why don't you take us on that diagnostic piece of your journey? Because we know that you had a long diagnostic journey. So why don't you share with us how many different doctors you saw and what your experiences were as you were going from doctor to doctor. And it's my impression you saw maybe over 50 doctors before you were ultimately diagnosed with Lyme disease.
Oh my gosh, I saw so many doctors. I went to so many hospitals. Like I said, I grew up in Middleburg Heights, Ohio, so I was close to Cleveland Clinic. There's also university hospitals. There's just so many hospitals. I just kept going from physician to physician for the better part of it was 18, 19 when I started getting sick. And I moved to Charlotte when I was 25 or 26. So I think in that 7-8 year time span, I guess, I went to so many doctors, went to so many physicians. Like I said, I kept getting diagnosis after diagnosis kept piling on because I wasn't getting better. I wasn't healing it. Like I said, the first was gastroparesis. Then a year later, I was dealing with the dizziness, vertigo. I ended up in a wheelchair. I couldn't walk around. So then they finally found out it was POTS. And then it was Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, Hashimoto's disease. I mean, at one point they thought I had cancer. I had to have a bone marrow biopsy. At one point I had fibroadenomas growing in my left breast. I had to get those removed and biopsied. They were benign, but that whole diagnostic journey was so difficult. And for the better part of it, I stayed in Western medicine. And so I was just given medications and diagnoses with no hope of any type of cure. They're just basically I got to the point where I had a laundry list of at least 30 to 40 different diagnoses, from autoimmune stuff to just random stuff oh gosh, anemia, just so many things. It's hard to remember now because it's such a long list. But I remember at that time being again, I'm just okay, this is what I'm going to have to live with. No one's telling me any of these things are curable. Everything's idiopathic. There's no root cause. No one could give me a root cause. But I thought it was so weird because I was I would go on social media. This is the only place that I could find anyone else who was struggling with these things. I'm just something in me was like, this isn't right. I'm like, how come I keep finding all these women, same age, same diagnoses, but like no one's giving us a root cause. I'm like, this doesn't make sense. I'm like, the fact that we have all these similar issues, no one can figure out what the root cause. I'm like, there has to be, like, this is like just some weird phenomenon. Like there can't be. So I remember moving to Charlotte with all these diagnoses, and I was meeting with some friends, and someone throughout Lyme. They're like, oh, I have Lyme. They're like, you have similar symptoms to me. She was like, did you ever get tested for Lyme? And I was just like, actually, and I was told that I was tested, but now going back, I don't think I really ever was. I think they did the preliminary one. They didn't even go all the way to the Western blots. They didn't hit enough markers or whatever. So finally, like, it was a total God thing. And I ran to another girl who had like Lyme, had a roommate for a hot second who had Lyme. And I was like, it just kept coming up. So I was like, okay, maybe I really do. So then that's when I went the more holistic route. So like Western medicine was failing me, medication, everything was failing me. I was on so many medications. I was just treating, basically band-aiding everything. So finally I went to the holistic route, and that's where like everything shifted for me. That's where I finally saw a chiropractor who was also very advanced in the sense that he did like infrared saunas, PMF machines. Like he did not just chiropractic work, you know? And he finally tested me for Lyme, and he was like, you have Lyme. And I'm just like, oh my God, the light bulb went off. I'm like, it makes sense. And how like Lyme would be the root of like causing like all like systemic inflammation, like all the things.
Mm-hmm.
So that was in it might've been like 2017. So I didn't get my diagnosis for at least like 9 years, I guess, after my initial symptoms. And then I went on the journey of treating my Lyme, then ran into mold, you know, that's a whole other thing. But yeah,
So Dana, this, I know there's more, but this is a big deal. Like, so you've been fighting this, you've been dealing with all the symptoms, you've been living with it, you've been trying to accept it, you've been battling it, you've been trying to convince the people around you this is real, trying to convince the doctors, getting these diagnoses are just stacking, right? Like you're just collecting them.
Mm-hmm.
And then you finally get to this doctor or this chiropractor who diagnoses you with Lyme disease. Mm-hmm. How did that feel for you after all those years of fighting?
Oh my gosh. I think it was just like, honestly, it was probably relief. I think it was it was a mix of both. It was emotional. I wrote a whole blog post about it literally on my last blog. It was called chronicallystylish.com. And it was my title of the blog post was called like misdiagnosed for 9 years, I think. And it was just like all my emotions poured into this blog post of like the journey of searching for so long and like knowing, like, I always like hoped there was an answer, like there was a root. Like I was just like, this doesn't make sense. I'm like, I didn't want to accept that, like, you know, like this was going to be my forever, like all these medications and all this, you know, like not knowing why or having it. So I think honestly, it was overwhelming, because then like you get like, you know, treatment plans where it's like, okay, I have to figure out this new diagnosis now and how I'm going to, but it was honestly like, I think more just like relief and like hope of like, okay, I finally have a root for like all these things. Whereas like, I just didn't before.
Yeah. I'm always like, I just feel like a diagnosis can, if we let it can be so helpful and relieving, and at least provide a map when we've just been like spinning our wheels, searching and searching and searching. And then what happens is you take the energy that you've been using towards figuring out and fighting and trying to get people to believe, and you shift it to actually healing. Yeah. Yeah.
So let's talk about the importance of diagnosis and the impact that has now on validation for you, meaning you now have an understanding of what's wrong with you. Yeah. And anyone who's saying to you that it's all in your head is now background noise, and the impact that has on the disassociation, meaning, are you now in touch with your onboard diagnostic system? Are you now feeling much more comfortable with reading your body signals? And is that one of the things that's helping you to heal?
Let me think about that. Yeah. Learning that I had Lyme again helped me like figure out like that was like the root. So it was like, rather than before I was treating all these symptoms, now I had a root diagnosis that I could like get at. And so that could like alleviate like everything else. So I just know like I started being able to like come off of medications because like finally treating the root route, like all these medications are like treating the symptoms. So getting that diagnosis was really helpful because I was like, I'm not having to just like, again, like Band-Aid and treat the symptoms. Now I could like treat the root. I don't think that answered your question though. Repeat your question.
But no, it does. It does answer the question. But see,
Yeah.
I think we really have to talk about why gaslighting is so dangerous. I mean, look, it's bad when we're gaslit by anyone, but I think it's particularly dangerous when we're gaslit by doctors. And the reason it's dangerous is we start to lose faith in our own body signals. I mean, like I never even thought of it until Katie pointed out that we may even leave our body altogether. But let's stay with the piece where we're in our body now and we have a diagnosis and we just don't believe our signals. And we get to the point where maybe we were where Katie was, where she's going through her training and she is a really smart young woman and she has very high EQ as well, but she doesn't know how to feel. Right? I mean, she's lost touch with how to feel and now researching how to feel. Does a diagnosis change that for you? Does it put you in a position where you now feel more comfortable in your own skin? And are you now in a position where you have a better capacity to read your own body signals?
Yeah, now I do, but I will be very honest and say it didn't happen until this year. So like that was my diagnosis, like what, 2017. And I think because it was just so new and so fresh, and honestly, I was still disassociating at that point of like, it was just another, like it was a diagnosis. It was the right one. It was finally the one I needed, but I still had disassociation to the point where like, I couldn't really, I was like trying to listen to my body, but I think I just been disassociated for so long. It really wasn't until this past year when I had a situation where like, it got to the point where I was detoxing too much. And like, it got to the point where my body was like, if you don't stop, I'm gonna stop for you. And my body did a full on stop. This literally was this summer, being totally transparent of like, and it got to a point where my body was like, you have to listen to me now or else you're in trouble. And I think like to your point, you said earlier, Katie, was like, when you've been in pain for so long and like, it's just like, when someone asks you like, how do you feel? Or oh my God, yeah, I've been going through this emotional trauma class and they're like, get in touch with your body. What is your body saying to you? And I'm just like, I don't want to listen to my body. Like my body's saying it's in pain. Like my body is screaming at me. Like, I don't want to feel that. Like, why do I want to sit in that? But it wasn't until this summer where like my body did a full stop. It was like, it's time. Like, it's time for you to listen to me. It's time for you to not run. It's time for you to not hide, and it's time for you to stop. And or else like, you know, like you're never, it just was like, it's time.
So what was different about this summer?
So that's where I'm sure we'll get to it at the end, but I actually started treating my Lyme with bee venom therapy. And I also was treating my gut at the same time. And so as like you've heard with my story so far, like my first symptoms were gut related. And so that's been my biggest issue throughout my whole journey is like my gut. And so I knew I that's been an issue for me, and I'm still healing it right now. But I was trying to do 2 protocols at the same time, and I couldn't mitigate the die-off. So I basically put myself in this extreme, like unconsciously or like not intentionally. I put myself in this like endotoxic state, and it like full on flare. And basically it capsized me, and it was just like, you cannot mitigate like the die-off. But it's because I hadn't learned to be in tune with my body of like what was too much, especially when you're in pain. Like when you develop a high tolerance for pain, and you develop a high tolerance for hard crap going through this stuff. So it's just like, I just kept pushing and pushing and not knowing when the line was too far, just because of like, again, like severe disassociation, not being able to read your body, not knowing how to listen to it when it's like, that's too far. But it's just like, I was so disassociated. I I was used to pushing and pushing and pushing, whether it's, pressure from so many things, like going back to, is it societal pressure? Is it the pressure of not wanting to feel pain, just want to get out of this season of sickness? It's just like a lot of pressure. But I think came down to not being able to hear and listen to my body just because I had been disassociated for so long. So I can say now I'm at a place like I feel my body now and I don't want to run. Like I feel I can listen to it. I know what it's telling me. I'm detoxing beautifully. I say beautifully, like it sucks detoxing, a little, but it's just like, I know what my body's saying to me. I know what it needs. I know what to do when it doesn't feel well. And like, that's been probably like the biggest blessing for me over the past year, is getting back in touch with my body and my emotions, to not run from them. And I think that is just such a big healing part for anyone of us dealing with like chronic illnesses. Like, again, like returning back to your body, which can be really scary. It can be really scary, but I think it's a really big part of the puzzle for a lot of us that have been sick for so long.
Yeah. Can I throw something in here?
Please.
I'm going to go out on a limb here, Rich, but I think it's Sex and the City. There's this quote around like, it takes half the time that you dated someone to get over them, like after a breakup. Mm-hmm. And when you were asking Dana about, re-embodying, like getting back into her body and the diagnosis, and is there a connection there? To me, like, it's like you're rebuilding trust with yourself. Yeah. So it could take a year, it could take 5 years, but like, it's not a surprise to me that if she was sick for 10 years, that like it's taken you 5 years or 4 years, right, to rebuild that trust with yourself. And so it's not an overnight thing, but it is like a relationship. We have a relationship with our bodies, just like we have a relationship with our parents or our partner or our kids or our siblings or whoever. Like, we have a relationship with our own body. And when the relationship has been unhealthy for whatever reason, and in multiple ways, of course that requires healing. And of course it's going to take time. And like, hopefully people inside our world and our community hear this and they're like, okay, like class, she's taking a emotional healing class, and there's trauma piece, and there's this, and there's, the physical healing, and there's the vegan, like it's so many things, right? People inside of this world know that like, it's like normal, right? But sometimes that's what it takes. Just like it might take a lot of time to heal from a heartbreak. Like, I think the experience we have with our bodies is like the biggest heartbreak of all, like losing trust in ourselves. And I, of course, agree that medical gaslighting is the worst thing in the world. But what I'll add to that is like, we have to look at how we gaslight ourselves. And like, we have to be our own advocates. We're taught that doctors are God, or like that's the role that they play in the world, right? But I don't believe that. I don't believe that at all anymore. And so we have to remember ourselves and remember our bodies and be like, aware of this entity that is part of us, but we also have a relationship with it. And that relationship can be embodied and it can be healthy, or it can be completely disembodied and detached and disassociated. And that's a Lyme thing, and also not a Lyme thing, right? Like, there's a lot of things that can take people out of their bodies, but obviously Lyme is a huge one.
So Katie, I think, just again, in the spirit of a Lyme podcast and the challenges that we have in this community, the challenges are starting to pile up here, right? So the first challenge that we all have is, the industrial medical complex lies to us and tells us they will diagnose us and they will treat us and they don't need our help and they don't need our input, right? So we begin with this sort of, this worship relationship with doctors. And, we've talked to a lot of people, from different cultures. I can't speak for the Greek culture, but I can tell you as an Italian American, we worship doctors. I mean, my mother's perspective was, You're a lawyer, you're a doctor, or you're a loser, right? That's it. I mean, literally worship these people, right? And that's how we were raised, you know. So we also had this cultural overlay, right? But then we have the second issue, right? Which is not only do we have this, you know, this industrial medical complex, we then have these poorly trained people. They don't know anything about Lyme disease, literally nothing, right? And if there is somebody that knows something about Lyme disease, you got to wait 3 years to see that doctor, right? So that's not going to work for us. Then we have this diagnostic testing that sucks, right? It just sucks. Nothing is good about diagnostic testing. And then the only thing that really does work, which is our onboard diagnostic system, our body signals, and they're beaten out of us, so we don't listen to them. So how can anybody heal from this disease when we have an unhealthy medical complex, we have incompetent doctors, we have testing that sucks, and they beat out of us the onboard diagnostic system? I mean, how do we get better?
Yeah, that's a good question.
That's a big question.
And
so,
yeah.
but of course, the answer really is we have to go through a process that you two are so beautifully describing, which is we have to get back in touch with ourselves. We have to learn about ourselves. We have to, you know, learn about our bodies, and we have to now start to embrace feeling what we've been ignoring, right? We, you know, and one of the things that I found to be really powerful, you were just talking about as you're going through your trauma training, Dana, is that you were disassociating, and therefore you didn't want to feel the pain, but pain is a signal. Right. And it's an important signal, and it's one we need to feel, and it's one that we have to learn how to manage. But you weren't even feeling it anymore, right? So
you're numb.
So you are numb, right? So you know, part of the things that we've observed here in the podcast, and I'd really like to, you know, get your input on this. And we've actually just created a framework, Matt and I recently. We're calling it the PARM framework, where the people that we see are successful on this podcast and healing is they essentially go through a 4-step process, with their doctors or not. So the first step in this process we've observed is a prehabilitation process, where you are identifying all the steps you need to go through to get back in touch with your body. You have to go through a process of detoxing, physically detoxing, emotionally detoxing, spiritually detoxing, where you're now cleansing your body and getting your body ready for a fight, you know, because you wouldn't go to war if you didn't go to basic training. You wouldn't play football if you didn't go to, you know, to a camp. I mean, everybody gets ready for this, but when we're going to, you know, war with Lyme disease, we don't get to the place where we're ready for it, right? Then you take a second step, and the A in our observation, or our framework, is a cyst, right? And we stay away from the word kill because it's our immune system that ultimately has to win the day. But we want to assist our immune system by reducing the microbe load, right? And if we do that too aggressively, as you know, you just talked about, Dana, you know, you'll become toxic, right? And we've had people on this podcast that said, you know, they were part of suck it up culture, and they just killed, and they became wheelchair bound, right? They became sicker than they were before, right? So you have to learn how to assist, but you can't do that if you're not reading your body signals, and you can't do that if you haven't gone through this prehabilitation or this preparation process. And then after you go through the kill process, then you have to go through rehabilitation, right? This is a traumatic experience. You know, going through this process is traumatic. And there are going to be all kinds of brain retraining and physiological, you know, rehabilitation you have to go through. And then, of course, we have maintenance, right? But we now have to learn how to maintain this, because as the car is going down the road, you're going to be living life and things are going to come up. And what we see with the people who are succeeding is they seem to be going through that 4-step process. And if they miss any of those steps, they have to come back and do it again. But that seems to be what we're seeing here. And I'm just wondering, Dana, whether or not this is consistent with what you're seeing, and would you have done this journey differently if you had known about those 4 steps that seem to be the successful steps before you started the journey?
Yeah, well, even with that analogy, I'm like, well, I have a perfect case study for that, in the sense that, like, I detox, and then like that I got to that second part, the assist, and I couldn't assist because I couldn't, you know, read my body, so because I was detoxing too hard.
Right. So you went through a process of physically detoxing.
Yeah.
But you didn't go through a process of socially and spiritually and emotionally detoxing. And that was just as important as the physical detox. So people think if I can rid my body of this, that's enough. But as it turns out, if you're killing too hard and you're not able to read that, you're going to become toxic anyway. So you can't just physically detox, right?
Yeah. Also, if your mindset is trash the whole time, you're not going to get anywhere.
Right. Like, and that's what I'm learning is like, it's all literally, the Lord literally told me this the other, like a few weeks ago, or maybe months ago. It was like, he's like, you can't heal the whole by only treating in part. And so he was like, I'm literally learning on my healing journey. It's all of it. It's mental, it's spiritual, it's emotional, and it's not neglecting any and all of it. And to your point of like, if you don't pass that one step, you're going to have to go back. It's like, if you don't learn that lesson or if you hit that step, like you're going to go back. It's like, I didn't learn it. So it's like, I had to go back. I had to go back to my body. And I feel like in my health journey, like it's been a 12-year journey now. It's like, I've tried everything. I've tried to do one thing at a time, or so like I just focus on the physical and like I don't even address the trauma, or I just focus on the emotional and I don't do anything to like, you know, get at the bacteria and the pathogen. Just like I'm come to this point in my journey, I'm like, you need to do all of it. You don't have to do all of it full throttle, but like if you can do a little piece, all of it, like it all matters. Because like to your point, Katie, like you cannot heal if you have a toxic brain telling you you're never going to get there, you're not going to make it through this protocol, you're too weak, or this thing's going to destroy you, or you're going to have it forever. It's just like you'll never get out of that pit. If you'll never be able to heal if those are the thoughts that continue to berate your mind. And that's where I've also learned, to your point, like Rich, like you also need support. Like I've come to learn, like I would not be where I am right now if I did not have emotional support. Like, and there were moments where I didn't have any, or even like in real life. And that's where a lot of times social media has been my saving grace, in the sense that like, if I couldn't connect with anyone in my real life, I knew there was other people on social media. Like I've made relationships with people on social media. Like I've extremely strong relationships. Like some of my best friends I haven't even met in real life, but only on FaceTime, because not only do you need, you need people, you need support, like to go through all this talks, to do all this, like you need it mentally, you need the emotional support, you need you need community. It's also a big part of it that I've learned, that you also need going through this.
So Katie, you're one of the best people in the community talking about mindset, and give me your thoughts about the mindset and the skill set, because that's the other piece that we're sort of starting to develop here from a framework standpoint. You have to have the right mindset and the right skill set when you're going through rehabilitation, pre-rehabilitation. Right mindset and skill set when you're assisting your body with the killing phase. The right mindset and skill set for each phase. So, can you talk to us about mindset and the importance of mindset, and recognizing that if you don't have the proper mindset, you physically can't heal, because if you're in fight or flight, then your body cannot physiologically heal.
Yeah, well, you said it right there, and that's like a pretty solid summary. I think that, you have to have this guiding belief of the desired outcome, right? Like when I teach in IGC, our new students, the first thing we teach them is a project plan. And the way you do a project plan is you figure out what and by when. What do you want and by when do you want it? You can't just have what, right? You have to have a timeline around it. There has to be like a container. And so when we go on a healing journey, like we have to actually know that we want to heal and when we want that for ourselves. If the expectation is that it's immediate, like that's not the right mindset either, right? But if the expectation is never, that's certainly not going to get you anywhere. And then when we start developing a project plan, we do it backwards. So we start with like the wish fulfilled. We start with like the desire, the end result, right? So we have to know what the end result is. And then we have to hold that in our minds and in our hearts as the intention. And I think that, so many people just like don't believe that they could heal, or don't believe that it's possible for them, or they say, oh, it's possible for that person, but not me. And I know who we're talking to on this podcast. I know, who the community is, but it's not that different from like someone saying, oh, well, that person can find their partner and get married, but I can't, or that person can get pregnant after years of infertility, but I can't, or that person can, you know, have this kind of career or make this much money, but I can't. You have to ditch that mindset. Like, you have to actually know and believe in your heart that even though you don't know how, and that's the part that we surrender to God or life or the universe or whatever you believe in. Like, we're not supposed to know how, right? We're supposed to just start with the belief and the desire. But the belief and the desire has to be so juicy and desirable that it's actually worth fighting for, even when we've fought so hard. I mean, I think so many Lyme warriors are just so tired. And I get that. Like, I really, really get that, you know, and I know that you get it, Dana. Like, you were in a wheelchair. I was bedridden. Like, we get it. But it's almost more tiring to believe that life is just over and this is how it's always going to be. And, you know, you start finding these examples. I mean, you've shared that you have best friends who you haven't even met in person yet, but you start finding these examples of people who maybe aren't fully healed, but they have the right mindset, right? They've got their head in a way that, like, the likelihood of them getting there immediately increases because they start to see the people and the resources that are positive that they can pull in to help them on their healing journey. I mean, it's sort of just like, you know, what's adding to your life versus what's taking away, right? It's kind of a simple math equation. Like, if I want to get here, if I need to get to net 100 or whatever it is, and I'm at, you know, negative 100, I can't take any more negative. Like, there's literally no space for any more negativity or toxicity in my life. I can only build. And of course, in the healing process, you're going to go backwards, right? Like, you're literally going to like perks, or you're going to get in a relationship with someone who is not a good, you know, force in your life, who's not a good influence, right? And sometimes when we're sick, we're really, really vulnerable. Like, I see it as like, we're porous, right? We're like a sponge. Like, it's so easy to soak up something that's not good for you. But we have to be really rigorous about, this works in my life, this doesn't. We have to become very, very discerning. I think that's the best word, is like, we have to develop this skill of discernment. And so if we can have this mindset of possibility and desire, and this is what I want for myself, and we can develop the skill of discernment, this belongs in my life, this doesn't. I have space for this, I don't have space for this. Like, I love you, but I can't right now, right? Knowing that, like, allowing ourselves to be advocates for ourselves, I think it helps the healing, right? It helps us rebuild trust with ourselves. It helps us get back into our bodies. Eventually we have to go see, you know, a traditional doctor again, right? Like, we have to find healing in this process. And the way to do that is, I think, you know, centering ourselves with knowing what our standards are.
So then why don't you talk to us a little bit about what it was like for you when there were a lot of people in the world telling you you were not going to get any better. It's okay to be sick. This is where you are. And what impact that mindset had on your ability to heal, because that's really what Katie's getting to here.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's where, I mean, you get to a point, you just get like so discouraged, or so many people are saying, you're like, okay, well, you know, if this is going to be my forever, then I'm just going to accept it and make the best of it. But this is also where I say, like, there was always something in me, even it was like the faintest bit of hope of like, no, like, I don't want to believe that. It was just like, even when I tried to accept it, it was just like, you know, I was like, ugh. And then to your point of like, I would see people on social media, like, actually like getting better. I'm like, okay, wait, but like, what are they doing? Right. Or it's like, to your point, like having those people in your life that have actually healed, and you're just like, well, wait, they're healing, why can't I? Or it's just like, they got there, why can't I? Or like, I literally say that because like I'm single, and I'm like, I see these people getting their, like, finding their person. I'm just like, well, if it can happen for them, why can't it happen to me? And like, so I think, yeah, I got to a point where it's just like, I thought I had to accept it, but there was always something in me that was like, like just didn't want to. And then seeing other people heal, I was like, no, I held on to those stories of hope of like, no, like they're healing, they're doing it. Like, this is what it did. Like, I'm going to like do that too. It gave me hope of like, no, like you can heal from this. Like, and you don't have to live like this your whole life. And so, yeah, I was seeing other people and their stories that like gave me hope too. Like that, like just like kind of like came in agreement with like what I really hoped and believed was to be true. And I believe that, like, I believe we can all heal. And to your point of like, we have this medical community, we have so many things stacked against us that are like, how the heck do you heal? And it comes down to like, I think we all have that in us. If we're really honest, there is this desire to believe that we want to heal. I know there are some people that believe like you can't, but it's just like, I think if we're honest, we all want to believe that we can, and we want that to be true. And it is true, because we have these stories, these amazing stories of people that have in many different ways. And that's where it also comes down to like what we've been talking about, like trusting yourself, knowing discernment of like, okay, what do I need to do for me to heal? Like, I know for me this year is like, okay, you need to start doing trauma work. It was just like, it's listening to that voice in you, trusting your gut of like, what's the next step? And I always have people ask me like, well, what should I do? And I'm just like, what is your gut telling you? And if you don't know, it's like, we have to get back in tune to that. Like, all of our bodies are so different. Like, and our bodies will tell us like what it does and doesn't want to do, which way it does and like doesn't want to go. Because at the end of the day, no matter what you do, it's just like, it's you and your conviction that's going to keep you going. And it's just like, if you don't have that personal conviction, like you're not going to want to keep with the protocol. You're not going to want to keep taking that supplement unless you know, like, this is what I know is the next step for me. This is what I know my body's telling me. This is what I maybe hear God or the universe telling me. Like, for me, it's just like, I know I'm doing this because like God told me, and like it, but it's like at the end of the day, I don't have a doctor rely, or like we can't rely on doctors to tell us. We can't rely on these things. Like, it really does come down to us, our own personal conviction and trusting that gut. But like we talked about this whole topic, like when we have such disassociation, we don't even know where to begin with that, or where to even start.
Yeah, so one of the challenges that we have, of course, is we have this binary brain, right? And on the one side of the coin, we're never going to get better if we can't, as Katie so brilliantly pointed out, if we don't create this vision of, and this very clear and powerful and multi-sensory vision of what we want and why we want it, then of course our brain is not going to take us there. But the challenge, of course, of having this binary brain that we have, where we'll either be in the sympathetic or parasympathetic state, is that when we're looking at this place where we want to be, and it's a really rich place and it's a really powerful place, then we start to feel inadequate, and it starts to become triggering for us because we're not there now.
Right.
And that's the balance that we have to strike here, right? Where we have to give ourselves permission to see ourselves as moving towards that. The power of yet, not the power of not being there, right? And when we have that mindset that, again, Katie she always blows us away how smart she is. We are setting out this very clear picture of you as the person you want to be. And then setting time parameters for when you're going to get there, but also being kind to yourself and recognizing that you have to find a model and you have to find a plan. And that's where we can get, I think, the positive elements of social media, the way you have, Dana, where you're seeing other people get better and you're looking at how they're doing it. And you're wondering whether or not perhaps there's a process that they have that you can borrow that can get you to that place, but you don't allow it to be a triggering experience where you're not paralyzed and certainly not able to listen to your body. So Dana, talk to me about what you think about that outline that both Katie did much better than I did, and I'm now outlining for you, where you have this dual process of having a clear vision for where you want to be, having a why and a timeline, but also being, showing yourself the grace that you need to be able to get there and not be triggered by not being there yet.
Oh my gosh, you actually depicted that so beautifully, or like so well, because that has been like my journey as of late. And I think it's so many journeys. I would call it like the in-between, the in-between of like, you're not where you were, but you're not where you want to be. And it's just like that tension of just like, I don't want to be here. It's just like, I want to be there. And it's just like, I keep hearing that word over and over again the past like few months. It's like the in between. It's like we're always in between something. It's just like someone, like to your point earlier, I think you were talking about like what people who, like I have a friend, she would deal with like infertility. It's just like that in between. Like we're all in some type of thing, whether it's healing from Lyme, wanting to have a baby, like that in between of tension of like, okay, well, this is where I want to be, is not where I'm at yet. Or it's like, this is what I know is true, but I'm here and this doesn't look like it's ever going to happen or whatever. And it's to your point of like having the faith to believe like this is possible and like not letting it. And that's where I always say, like, it takes so much mental fortitude to get yourself to believe like you're going to make it and you're going to be okay, to keep that mindset that like, this is your future, this can happen, this is possible. The mental fortitude it takes to continue to like connect to that hope and to connect to that belief is what astounds me. Honestly, like in the Lyme community, people that continue, like we continue on treatment to continue to like, to believe for that. Like, and I'm just like, I'm amazed. And I read The Body Keeps the Score recently. Book blew my mind, changed my life. And even the therapist said it was like, it's like the human spirit. And like what he learned most from trauma patients is just like their inability to like never give up. And like, that just takes so much strength and mental fortitude. And so that's what I feel like it's the thing that's like kept me this whole journey of like just keeping, like you're saying, Katie, like that vision in mind of like, this is my future. I know I'm going to get there one day, and just continuing to remind myself. And like, that's where you have to have a positive mindset, but then you also have to have community when your mind plays tricks on you. Like I have people that are on call for me when I'm like, hey, like when I'm going through like assisting or, you know, detoxing, I'm like, hey, you know, like my mind's going to play tricks on me. My body's going to tell me I'm not healing, but I was like, I'm going to call you. And when my mind tries to tell me different, like you need to be the voice of reason outside of my head to be like, no, you're going to make it. It's going to be okay. You're just in a flare. You're healing. It just doesn't feel like it right now. And that's where I think it's twofold. Like you have to have like, you know, that conviction, that mental fortitude, that gut, that intrinsic thing inside of you, but you also need community to be that voice of reason outside of your mind when it really does try to play tricks on you. And it's not even your mind, you know, like when we know when you're getting rid of things, killing things, like it like, you know, it messes up with your mind, like not even like on purpose, you know. And that's where it's like my suggestion or like my advice for people would be like, again, and if you don't have anyone in your life, what I do is like, I have people on social media. I'm like, hey, I've never met you. Like we've never met in real life, but they're the people that'll call like, hey, I'm going to need you. And I have people like on call for that. I think that is also, that would be like something I would advise like to find those people, whether they're physically in your life or if you can find them digitally. There are some great people in the Lyme community that, because I know you believe it too, and you believe it, Rich and Katie, like we all believe that healing is possible and it'll happen for us all. We just have to be on our own journey to figure out how to get there. But there are people that will support you along the way, and it's crucial.
Well, let's talk about another word that Katie talked about, which is discernment, right? Mm-hmm. And being discerning, because I wish everyone on social media were manifesting the way you are articulating the manifestation, Dana, because there are some people that are sick. And there are some people that don't believe they can get better. And then they're the people that are, quite frankly, attacking people like Katie and calling her an ableist, right? And so I think we have to be careful about what we do here on social media. I mean, the other thing that I do want to get both of you to give me some input on is when you're seeing groups of people all doing the same treatment, right? Either we're bio individuals and we are on our own journey and we're on our own path and we're at different stages of our emotional and physiological journey, or we're not, right? So how could we all be doing the same treatment at the same time when we're all bio individuals and we're at different stages on our journey? So, you know, I think there is a dangerous side of social media. And I think both this sort of ableist mindset or maybe disableist mindset, as well as this, hey, we're all doing the same treatment at the same time, is always concerning to me when I see it. So I wonder what your thoughts are on sort of the dangers or the dark side of social media.
Yeah, I can speak a little bit to that in the sense that I remember before I found the community I have now, I remember like not having like any Lyme community. I was new to it a few years ago. So I was like, oh, what is Lyme? What does all this mean? You know? And I went to Facebook and, you know, joined like some Lyme groups. And I will say like my first experience with those groups, I mean, it was heavy. I mean, heavy stuff. I mean, you have people on there and my heart just goes out because I understand everything they say. Like I relate with where they're like, I feel like I'm dying, like I'm not going to make it. But it got to a point where like I had to, for my own mental health, I was like, I cannot follow groups where it's just like not doomsday, because it's truly heartbreaking because you feel for these people because you have the same emotions and feelings, but like to see it day in and day out, it starts instilling fear in you. Like it literally like starts planting itself in you. And to your point, Richard, like discernment of like, it got to the point where I was like, this isn't good for me and my mental health, because it's literally putting fear into me, like fear of like, oh my God, what if I do die? What if this does kill me? It's like that balance, or it's hard because it's like you feel and you understand, you relate and you get it, but also it's like, this is not good. Like to your point of like we were saying earlier about them, you have to be cognizant of the environment you're in. And like, that was not a good environment. So I've had to learn to like put up boundaries, I guess, is what I'm getting at is like that discernment of like what I can and can't handle. Like even earlier to our earlier conversation, when you were saying like when you were saying Yolanda was like the housewives was like toxic. I get to the point sometimes where like I'm watching a reality TV show, and if there's too much toxicity, I have to turn it off because I'm like, I can't handle the drama. Like it's just like I can feel it coming on my body. I'm like, I can't. And that's where I've just had to learn like I guess like discernment, boundaries of like my body, my mind, my emotions can't handle that. It's too much. It's too fear induced. And I think it just comes down to, again, like what you can and can't handle, what your boundaries are, having discernment for like your own healing journey. Like what is gonna, like to your point, like what's going to benefit you, Katie, like we said earlier, like what is good and healing for you. And my heart goes out to like all these people that believe different, like, cause I was there too. Like, I remember being in Western medicine and thinking like, this is it. Like, this is, you know, this is going to be my forever. I've seen these medications that make it worse. It's just, and everyone's on their own journey, and but I just know for me, like I've come to the belief that like you can heal because I've seen people do it.
So can you give us your thoughts about you know, the way our brain gets us to where we want to be, but it won't get us to a good place unless we are envisioning that good place. If we're not setting these clear outcomes for ourselves, and how important is that for us, so that our brain can get us there both consciously and subconsciously, and get us the tools that we need to take the steps to get there, without, of course, being triggered into paralysis because we're feeling, you know, we're feeling inadequate because we're not there yet.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really about two things, which is possibility and then evidence. And when it comes to possibility, like we have to believe that something is possible for us, right? And that requires in certain moments, not ignoring evidence, but understanding that there might not be evidence, right? There might not be evidence that we can have the thing that we want to have, which in this case is healing. However, there is evidence out in the world. There are people who have healed, and there's certainly, you know, this aspect of putting aside negative evidence or evidence that shows otherwise. So like if it got to the point for me where it was like, my hypothesis is that I believe I can heal. I think that maybe it is possible for me. It might not be, but I think that maybe it is, right? And so I had to believe that. I had to establish that that was my hypothesis. And then I had to start collecting evidence in my own life, right? So that might be like, I feel good for like an hour a day. That is the hour that I feel good. If I feel good for 1 hour, maybe I can feel good for 2 hours. If I feel good for 2 hours, maybe I can feel good for a day. If I feel good for a day, maybe I could feel good for a whole week, right? And we know in the Lyme community that like this is very hard because you feel really up and down, and that plays into people not believing you because, well, you had a lot of energy yesterday. You were able to go out, you stayed out late, you partied, you did this, you went to dinner, right? But that's not who I am today, right? And so there's a lot of ups and downs. And I think that the key with Lyme in particular is knowing that in the downs, there's going to be an up and remembering the ups, right? And so for me, it was like about gathering all of this evidence that I was going to be able to feel good, and that feeling good and healing would be possible for me. But like you said, there has to be so much mental fortitude. Like I remember like literally feeling like I was physically moving my brain to focus on certain things and to ignore other things. And I do think that it's like a muscle, right? When you go to the gym, if you haven't been lifting weights, or if you just do arms and you never do legs or whatever, you're going to have some muscles that are strong and some muscles that are weak. I think we have to think about our brain the exact same way. If you focus on the negative, that's what's going to be strengthened. If you focus on the positive while detoxing or getting rid of or ignoring or putting to the side the evidence that you don't want, then inevitably you're going to get stronger. Like it's sort of impossible for it not to happen. It's certainly not going to be perfect along the way, but that's how I look at it.
All right, so you have to be prepared to walk in the dark, right? You're not going to be able to see every step in the process. Each one of us is an individual. Each one of us has a different set of microbes in our system. Each one of us has had the microbes in our system for a longer period of time. So it's going to be a really individualized journey. But as you're walking in the dark, and as you take each step forward, you're going to get that hour where you're feeling better, or the 2 hours where you're feeling better. And each one of these positive signs, and of course, now reading your body signals and getting that positive feedback from your onboard diagnostic system puts you in a position where you're getting closer and closer to the Wizard of Oz, right? You're getting there, but it's one step at a time, and you can't see the whole path forward, which is a scary and lonely path, but it is a path forward. And one of the things that I think is just so cool about doing the podcast with cool people like you is that we've gotten to see hundreds of people follow their own path to healing. Hundreds. And, and you can hear, now I think we have over 300 episodes up, most 2 hours long, where you will have, 600 or 700 hours of people sharing with you the steps they took so that you can model those steps and understand what that process is, the way the two of you are now. So Dana, why don't you talk to us now about the beautiful elements of this journey, on how this has been a sort of purifying process for you, where all of these social and educational and cultural, things were stripped off of you. So you now are a pure version of yourself. You understand who you are, you understand what your purpose is, and how going through this journey has helped you to get there.
Yeah, I think I touched on it a little bit earlier when I was like, one of the biggest gifts I've gotten this past year is just coming back into my body, being disassociated for so long. I mean, and I think, just coming back into my body, learning to love my body and like love me again has been, I'm like, I don't know if I want to say that. Like, it was all worth it, It's just like, I don't know. But to get that back has been just such a blessing, being able to, again, like love me, love my body, get back in tune with it, know what it's saying, and how to take care of it. That's been one of the biggest blessings. Also, again, in this past year, I've just done a lot of like trauma therapy work, and it's like, oh my gosh, if I wouldn't have gone through this, I probably never would have, unless you go through like hard things like this, nothing really would have like made me like reflect back on, you know, childhood and everything I've gone through. And honestly, I can say now, like, and this is vulnerable and personal, is like, I remember growing up, like I was just so scared to be like a mom or to have kids, because I was like, I don't like, I'm still like a messed up human being. Like how am I gonna have kids with like, whereas like you can't teach someone when you don't know. So I was like, well, how am I gonna teach kids how to be, you know, like feel safe and feel loved? And if like I don't even know what that feels like, I don't know how to do that. Like I don't know how to teach myself, but like I'm learning what that looks like and feels like now, to whereas like I'm not scared to be a spouse, a mom, because like I know what it looks like to cultivate like a healthy, safe environment, have healthy communication, to have a positive relationship with people around you, with your body, to not be scared of things. Like I'm still going through like healing like different fears, and just again like being able to be me, stand my own, not have to seek other people's approval. And like I guess what we've been talking about, like the dark side of social media, man. I mean, you can get so much criticism. I mean, it takes courage to put yourself out there for criticism and just continue to share and be vulnerable and open. That's something that I'm even going through now, is just like getting to the point where like I can just stand on my own 2 feet and be like, this is me, for better, for worse. I'm comfortable with me. I'm happy with me. God loves me as me. There's no shame and condemnation around anything. And we can have disagreements, and like it's okay like to disagree in love, and for like criticism, for things not to kind of like take me out, like, because it is hard, you know, just being vulnerable and open on social media and not letting, you know, the criticism just literally rock you to your core. It's just, I'm developing that muscle to have like strong conviction of like, this is who I am. And if you don't like it, or it's like it rubs you wrong, I'm so sorry. There's still love there, but like we can agree to disagree or whatever. Like I'm growing into that person now, and that is one of the biggest blessings that I've received and am receiving. But like again, just the self-awareness, the going through life, my life history, like I wouldn't have gone through all that. And then just the knowledge that I'm getting, or have gotten, on like how to live a healthy lifestyle, to your point of like maintenance, when you get to that 4th stage, like going through all this has taught me about living in healthy environments, not just physically, not just mentally, but like physically, like in the diet you should eat, the toxins you shouldn't put on your body, like with beauty products. Like going through all of this, my whole Lyme journey has just taught me how to live a very healthy, holistic life. And I'm getting to the point where it's like, I'm not going to run from it anymore. I'm going to lean into it, because it's in that tension and it's in the pressure that like, if you run from it, you're going to be running from it your whole life. There is no life without tension. There is no life without good and bad. So it's just like, I'm now learning to live a life where it's just like, I have the resiliency to do that. I have the capacity where like I didn't before. And yeah, I'm learning how to live that life where it's like holistic, and I know what to do for my body, my family, and the world around me. And that's just that's some of the biggest blessings.
That is unbelievably beautiful. And I think that should take us to the final question, which my guest co-host always gets asked. Katie now gets to ask you the final question of the podcast.
Do I have to ask your question, or do you want me to make mine?
Whatever you want.
Yeah.
My final question is, if someone's going through this journey that you have been going through, that you're still on, what is the one thing that you would tell them to hold on to hope throughout the way?
I would tell them, don't give up. That thing inside of you that wants to believe it, like it's true and it's real. Like hold on to other people's stories, like those beacons of hope. Like it's possible. Just tell them like, don't give up. I would want to tell them like, you're not crazy at all. It's not in your head. You're not making it up. And also I would want to tell someone that it's not their fault. Like, I think I believed that for a really long time, that like I made myself sick, or it's my fault that I'm sick, or I did this to me, or I'm making myself sicker. Like, and that's 100% not the truth. Like, you didn't make yourself sick. This is not your fault. and there is healing and there is hope, and just like, don't give up. You're gonna make it. Hold on to other people's stories, and like, you can trust and believe that little small faint little whisper or like little spark of hope in you that wants to believe that this is true, because it is. And you can, like you said, you can look for the evidence and it's there, and hold on to that when everything else wants to tell you like the opposite, like your mind, your symptoms. It's just like you, like you said, it takes mental fortitude to just keep going back and back to that. But it is a muscle, and like, you will get there. But I would just tell someone, like, do not give up, and believe that little small faint voice in you that's like, it's possible, because it is.
So Dana, I can't thank you enough for taking so much time out of your life to help our community learn so much of what they can do to heal. And as always, Katie, just a brilliant young woman who is always unbelievably insightful, and certainly a much better co-host than Matt Sabatella.
Crazy. Thank you for having me. Thank you, Dana. This was so great.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a blessing.
Thank you so much for listening to the Tick Bootcamp interview with Dana Papadopoulos. I hope you loved it as much as we do. To our listeners, we have a call to action. First, if you'd like to learn more about Dana, which you definitely do, please visit her Instagram page at Dana Renata. That's DANARENATA. Second, if you enjoyed this episode of the Tick Bootcamp podcast, please share it with your friends. People need to hear this, so use the social media buttons you see at the bottom of the post. Third, Tick Bootcamp has created a Tick Bite blueprint that's inspired by information that's been provided by past guests on this podcast. We urge you to visit our website and check it out at www.tickbootcamp.com to view the blueprint. Please note we would appreciate any input or improvements you would like to see us offer. Fourth, don't forget to subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen, to get automatic updates for our Tick Bootcamp podcast. And finally, we thank our community for your comments on our past podcast episodes. Please take a moment to leave us an honest review on Apple Podcasts, on Instagram, or on our website. We make it a point to read every single one of the reviews we get. Thank you so much for listening.